Hey folks, my name is Cooper, and today I am reviewing the movie Nosferatu. As far as I can tell, this is a remake of a movie that originally came out in the 1920s. I have not seen any remakes that have been done since, but this is based off of the story of Dracula. It is your very classic vampire tale, so not a particularly novel concept, but not one that has been remade, at least in the vein of the original, in a long time. Personally, I am not somebody that watches a lot of horror movies, haven't played a lot of horror video games. Not because I dislike the genre, I tend to enjoy the good horror stuff that I've seen, just not something I've generally gravitated to, and something, especially when I was younger, I definitely was. We get a little overly afraid, get a little queasy, and I'm somebody that really doesn't like um, over reliance on gore. I definitely can get pretty repulsed when something is heavy on gore, heavy on, I guess, trying to disturb you as its main, again, horror element. So, shied away from a lot of horror, but this was one that I found, and this was not one I just sort of went and saw this on a whim. Again, I wasn't really seeking it out, but I had heard a couple of good things. I'm not super plugged into Twitter or reviews or whatnot, but I thought it was going to be worth watching. I showed up and decided to watch it instead of Moana 2 because I showed up to the theater a little late for Moana 2. And I enjoyed it a lot. Again, I'm not a big horror guy, especially when you're reliant on jump scares or, especially for me, gore, overly grotesque scenes and whatnot. This movie did not rely at all on those. There were a couple of moments that were a little disturbing, a couple of scenes. Specifically, I would say that when Nosferatu was feeding, it was a little disturbing, but again, on the scale of what you'll see in horror movies, it was, pretty light, those scenes specifically, and overall, it was just a very, the fear and the horror came from the mood, the environment, the visuals, and then I would say sort of that sense of impending dread, right? The despair that you felt. It was almost closer to being a thriller than a horror movie in the classic sense. I mean, it was certainly a horror movie, don't get me wrong, and there were plenty of horror moments. But I would say that the fear that you felt was mostly reflected from the characters, whereas what I personally felt was more of the tension that was building. And again, I think that dread, that sense of dread, sort of something that's slowly creeping towards you that you can't prevent, and you know that it's going to happen. You know that it's going to be bad, but you can't do anything to stop it. Right? That's more what I felt than any real sense of fear. Or again, when you see something like overemphasis on gore, you get more towards disgust. I would never say there was anything like that. So I appreciated that about it first and foremost. The plot, I don't think was anything special, but I don't think that it needed to be. I think that the writers of this movie did a really good job of just taking the story, not reinventing it, but just retelling it in a very well put together and professional manner. I think I appreciated how straightforward this story was. There was no real, mind bending, no fourth wall. Again, I'm sort of coming off of this after playing Inscription, the video game, which I did a review on, my first review. That was a very mind bending type of game, right? Lots of different layers into it. This story was very much, we have a point A, we're going to point B. You kind of know how we're going to get there. We're not trying to disguise things. We're not trying to trick you as the viewer. Outside of, I would say, even like the first 15 minutes or so, for the most part, you can tell where things are going. But I don't think that that takes away from the story. In fact, I think that it's a strength. The analogy that I came up with, so I'm a huge sports fan, and one of the signs of having a great defense in football is the ability to just call your defense, have no trickery, have no disguises, and still be able to beat the opposing offense consistently, right? Some of the good defenses in the league will tend to have disguises, right? A safety is pretending to play back and then they'll blitz. Multiple guys sort of sitting back there pretending to blitz or dropping off, right? Trickery, deception. This movie doesn't rely on that at all, and I think that is a compliment, right? That showcases that they know that the plot is strong in the original telling of it, that they did not need to do a lot to remake it, right? And also they knew that the rest of the movie was strong. Their characters were well done. The actors played very strong characters, and the visuals and the sound were also very impressive. So I thought that analogy of, again, this movie was not one that tried to deceive you. They weren't trying to trick the offense. They were just lining up and they said, we're better than you, right? We know that what we have is great, so we can just run what we have. I thought that was really impressive, right? You don't have to subvert your expectations if what you have is simply good. As opposed to trying to subvert expectations, they just took the expectations that I had and exceeded them. Which, again, I think that there is something beautiful about being able to do that. I think that was really impressive. They didn't have to put their own twist on the plot. The movie is good whether or not you know where it's going. Whether or not you know the original story of Nosferatu, whether or not you've seen this movie already, or listened or watched a review of it. I think that the movie is good regardless. So I think that that's a really impressive thing, specifically with the plot that I came away with. And again, I think in this one, the plot sort of gives deference to the other aspects of the movie. Again, the visuals and the characters, I think, are the two that I really wanted to talk about. So first, the characters. I think the main character, Lily Rose Depp, who played Ellen, the main character who sort of has this bond to Nosferatu, she was phenomenal. She was incredible. The couple of possession scenes that she had, specifically the one where she had that creepy little smile, they were incredibly creepy. They were incredibly disturbing. Again, in the way that you get from good acting and good writing, good camera work, as opposed to, again, just gore where you're cutting off arms and throwing people into shredders and stuff, right? It was very disturbing to see her sort of twist and the seizures that she had in the bed, right? It was very creepy. I really appreciated, again, the characters and the way that they acted and the way that they thought. Very often when they doubted her, Ellen, who sort of understood that this Nosferatu character existed the whole time because she had this bond with him, she had these visions throughout her life since she was a young girl. But obviously the characters around her didn't believe her, right? Because why would you? If somebody in real life came to me and said, oh, I'm possessed by this evil demon who I bonded with when I was young, right? I would say that doesn't really make sense, right? That sort of goes against every single thing that I've seen in my entire life, in every piece of history that I've read, every single thing that any human has ever seen, right? So it should take a lot of evidence to push you away from that. However, when evidence was presented, again, when Thomas was in that castle and sort of over time realized what was happening to him, they did take those beliefs to heart, right? They weren't stubborn, they weren't stupid, which I think not needing your characters to be stupid to move the plot along is something that I value a lot. When characters do stuff that's stupid or are overly stubborn, I find that very frustrating. Having the doctor go to Willem Dafoe, who played sort of the mad doctor who was in touch with all these dark, the dark arts or whatever you'd want to call them, going to him as a former pupil as opposed to just having this be almost like a gaslighting of the audience or just sort of ignoring the thing that we know that exists, right? Nosferatu, this sort of demon, this vampire character. I thought that it made it a lot more enjoyable having characters that you were following that believed that this was real, but not in some sort of faith or sort of it was grounded in reality. It was grounded in the evidence that they had seen. It was grounded in texts that they were reading. It was not just some sort of whatever woo-woo stuff. And I appreciated that a lot. Again, the two doctors being the ones that were sort of taking that bastion on, and again, getting information off of old stories and text. I appreciated that a lot, right? I feel like a lot of times movies are kind of calling you dumb, almost. Again, presenting you this information that you know, but the other characters that are actually in the movie don't know. I know that that's a great way to build tension, But I think that sometimes that gets a little frustrating, especially if you're making the characters not know this important information for so long into the story, right? In this story, I think they did a really good job of having the characters realize in a timely fashion in times that it made sense and based off of information that made sense. For the most part, I felt like all the characters were doing things that, again, made sense. They followed their own incentives, they followed the character traits that were presented. So something like when Friedrich, right, the friend of the couple, Ellen and Thomas, when Friedrich kicks them out of the house, he does so at a time that makes sense, right? He's sort of fed up with Ellen and her seizures and the way that this is all playing out. He realizes that something very wrong is happening, but he's been presented with something that makes perfect sense. A plague ship has appeared, rats have poured out into the city, and there's a plague going on, right? And these folks are insisting that there's some vampire out there, right? That makes no sense. He wasn't being overly cruel or overly disparaging, right? He was somewhat rude and, again, somewhat callous. He was the last one to believe, but it's not like it was unreasonable that he was acting that way. It's not like it was insane for him not to believe, right? And when he was presented with very obvious evidence, which I won't go into what happened, but he at that point believed and again acted in ways that sort of made sense with not just him as a character, but what you would think a real human would do, which is very important to me, right? I don't like when characters are just nonsensical or doing things that seem like they're only doing it to advance the plot, not because it's what the character would do as they were written. I think that overall the characters, again, even someone like Nosferatu, right, was sort of driven by this irrational, sort of insatiable, overpowering need to be with this person, this woman that had sort of summoned him and woken him up for this slumber, right? He is evil in nature, and the things that he does are evil, and he is pursuing something that I would say is an evil goal. But it's not just evil for the sake of being evil. It's not like his goal is like world dominance, some sort of whatever kooky thing. He has a very specific desire that is driving him, that even he knows that it's irrational to some extent. Again, you can't go too much into that. It's not like he's monologuing necessarily. But it seems like even he knows that this is just an unstoppable passion for something that he can't have, and a desire to get it no matter what no matter what it takes, right? Just overall, I really appreciated that the character's decision making was logical. You sort of understood who these people were. Even, again, Nosferatu, you sort of understood who he was. All these characters all around, their motives made sense, their personalities made sense, and it fit with their motives and it fit with their actions. So I really appreciated that. And again, I think that Ellen, the actress, was very impressive. I thought Thomas was really good. I obviously, Nosferatu was obviously a phenomenal character as well, very creepy. I think that visually, Nosferatu, and this also to go into the visuals of the movie, which were the other key area that I wanted to touch on. Visually, it's fantastic, right? I mean, again, I'm not sort of saying anything that hasn't already been said, but I think Nosferatu himself is incredibly, again, he's pretty disturbing, very monster-like with his appearance, but without going too far with it, right? You do kind of understand when Thomas gets into the castle why he's not like, oh, a monster, and doesn't freak out and run away, right? Because the guy, the Nosferatu, the vampire, is close enough to looking like a human that it's somewhat believable, right? He's in a region that he's not familiar with. These are people he doesn't know. The dude's speaking English. He's still communicating with him, right? He had been described as eccentric and incredibly old. So I think that the design of Nosferatu was really impressive because it did sort of blend, this is a monster, and I know that he's a monster, so I can see the monster, but it still looks like a person to an extent. At least enough of a person that it makes sense why the character is not just freaking out and fleeing. And again, the idea that the goals are to sort of fill this insatiable lust and this desire that he's been stricken with, it does make it feel a little bit more, again, relatable is not the word, but understandable, what this character is, what his motivations are. I think that other parts of the visuals, right? The black and white scenes are really cool. That's something that uh, is just always fun to see in movies, and especially this one that's taking place in the earlier, I think maybe the 1830s, 1840s, the mid 1840s, mid 1800s. I thought it was very cool how they did the black and white, but without just. There was the black and white aspects, and then there was a lot of just darkness, but it wasn't darkness in the way that sometimes, like video games are very bad about sometimes just making things really dark, and that means just obscuring details. This was not darkness that was shrouding details. This was darkness that sort of coated the details that you would see, and I think that was really nice. Right, you still got a great visual despite how dark it was. The trip to the castle specifically, I thought was really good. The ways that the locals acted, again, it was some combination of upset and aggressive, but also scared. It was more of a wary sensation, but even like the old lady sort of says prayers for him, right? It's not like they hate him, it's that they are concerned and sort of understand what's going to happen. I think the scene specifically where Thomas is picked up at the crossroads and the carriage with no driver comes and picks him up, I think that's a really powerful scene. I think it looks fantastic. And I also think it's just an interesting idea of, okay, well, we sort of see that Thomas he's committed to this. He's sort of gone past the idea of doubt. And it makes it, again, more believable that he is going to believe what he needs to believe once he gets to the castle, and he's going to ignore the fact that he kind of looks like a monster, because, again, monsters aren't real, right? I mean, if I saw somebody that looked creepy, I wouldn't be like, oh, it's probably actually just a vampire. I would think, wow, that's really weird. I guess that's just a really creepy looking person. So I think that having him incrementally desensitized to these weird, sort of monstrous, inexplicable things made it make more sense that he eventually made the decisions that he did in the castle. And I think that specific scene with the horses pulling up, again, it was very dramatic. It was very strong visually, and I think it was also just strong in terms of the plot, and specifically with Thomas's character, right? Breaking down his walls, hitting him with red flags that are subtle red flags, more the orange flags, and then the worse and worse they get. Well, he's already made these jumps, he's already made these decisions, he's almost in too deep to go back. So that, and then the castle itself, I thought were just visually great. The sort of descent into madness that Thomas had was just really well done in terms of how he sort of reacted, how disheveled he became, and then just how chaotic the scenes in the castle were, right? It felt just sort of like strewn together, like these weird disconnected scenes, but that makes sense because a lot of it was being seen through Thomas's eyes, or at least that was our stand-in for those scenes. So I thought that the castle scenes, and specifically that the carriage picking him up and taking him to the castle, I thought this was really well done. Those were definitely my favorite in the movie. Those are the ones that stuck with me the most, and I still can picture those dark roads in the black and white with those black horses pulling up with the carriage. Overall, I think the movie was just a very memorable experience. Again, it was a straightforward story. It was a retelling of something that already exists. It was not particularly clever or innovative, right? This is not like the original Avatar that was sort of a next generation movie that pushed the industry forward. But I think everything it wants to do, it does very well. It in no areas overshot or overestimated its capabilities. I don't think that it underperformed anywhere. Again, I think that the characters were great, the story was good, the art was really cool, again, the visual effects, and I thought the music was also very good, the sound effects. I think that the plot not being reliant on deception or twists or too much, again, analogy or metaphor or deeper meanings, right? There was a little bit, again, something like the Nosferatu arriving on that ship of plague rats, so it's sort of the plague is kind of representative of Nosferatu and his plague on the humankind, and it sort of blends like, okay, is he responsible for all these people dying, or he came on the plague ship. It's sort of, sort of a blurred thing there. But for the most part, you got the story that you were being told, and it was not on you to decipher what was happening, right? Nosferatu was the bad guy. He was a vampire, and they needed to kill the vampire, right? It's sort of, it is what it is, right? It's not too crazy, not too clever, but also just, I think that was okay in this circumstance. They think they knew the story they were telling, and they just did it justice. By far, what I think the greatest strength of the movie is its characters. They were all very relatable. I think they all were easy to empathize with. I think it was easy to be invested in their success and the fact that they were able to identify problems that existed. Again, they were able to start as ignorant, figure out through evidence and things that made sense in their own experiences what problem had arisen. Again, specifically that Nosferatu was here, or that he was coming, then eventually arrived, and he was the problem they had to deal with. They took things and interpreted them as a real human would do. Again, it's hard to really say how a human would react when a vampire comes to land, because we don't have a lot of experience with that, but I think that their actions and their processes, their decision making, made a lot of sense, which I appreciated, right? I think my one complaint, other than, again, it didn't really revolutionize anything, which I don't think every movie has to do, but that's something that would set certain movies apart, sort of being innovative in the field. This is not necessarily one that's incredibly innovative. It's just taking things that already exist and are well established and making a really good version of them. This is a really good retelling of a story. I think my one complaint, other than, again, it's not much of a complaint, but just is somewhat of a demerit from keeping it from being a perfect movie, right? My complaint would be that the Mad Doctor, Willem Dafoe's character, was kind of annoying. I definitely felt like he got shoehorned into the story a little too much. To possession scenes, I think it made a lot of sense for him to be central. Him talking with Ellen and kind of devising a plan made a lot of sense. But I thought there was just a little bit too much focus on him, especially the end of the movie. I would have really liked for it just to have been Ellen and Thomas in those last moments. Instead, he had some quote, which I don't even really remember what it was, but he was like sitting in the window smoking his pipe and had some quote. I just really thought that the focus should have been on the two main characters, who the story was actually about, and obviously Nosferatu as well, but I just hated the idea that he was... I thought he was way too much of a focus of the story. Too much attention, and again, maybe some of that was just because it's Willem Dafoe and he's a great actor, and he did a great job, right? He was very captivating, but I almost thought they used him a little too much the later it got into the movie. But other than that, again, it was a very entertaining movie. I highly recommend it, even to people who aren't typically horror movie fans. Again, I'm not someone that watches a lot of horror. This is not something that's overly disturbing, overly gory, not very reliant on jump scares. I would say that it's more for people that really like thrillers. Again, you're going to have some horror aspects to it, so you need to be okay with that. But I would describe it almost as more of a horror-based thriller. So I think that if you're someone that has a queasy stomach, don't really like that sort of intensity, it's probably not for you. And obviously, you shouldn't be taking your kids to see this. There is some amount of nudity. It's still, again, pretty disturbing as far as any movie, compared to Moana 2 or Sonic, right? This is a pretty disturbing movie. But for most people, I think you're really going to enjoy this movie. Personally, I'm going to give it, and I'm still not totally sure what the scale I'm going to do is, but I'd give it like an 85 or an 8.5. It's not quite in that top echelon. Again, it's not necessarily doing anything groundbreaking or anything that's going to need to be iterated upon, but it itself is a great standalone film that has iterated upon a bunch of things that already exist and just fine-tuned a lot of things. It's just a well put together movie that has a lot of, again, it doesn't have a lot of moving parts in terms of the plot, in terms of the characters, but the things that are introduced are just done very well. Very solid fundamentals, and they built a very solid movie on top of that. So I was very happy with it, and I think you will be too if you go and see it. So that's my review of Nosferatu. Hope you enjoyed, and hope you enjoy the movie as well. Thanks.